A werewolf shifter romance, for you. Prologue. Every child of the Silver Ridge Pack meets their inner beast at the age of 10. I still remember the exact smell of the damp pine needles under my bare feet, the suffocating weight of my father's heavy, armored hand pressing down on my shoulder, and the mocking, eager grins of my older siblings as we waited in the sacred grove. The air was thick with anticipation. It was the night of the awakening ceremony, the sacred ritual where the moon grants us the spirit of the wolf. As the full moon reached its absolute zenith, casting a silver sheen over the ancient stone altar, the other children began to shift. One by one, bone cracked, fur sprouted, and the proud, triumphant roars of young apex predators filled the night air. My sister, Chloe, shifted into a beautiful, gold-furred wolf, her amber eyes flashing with immediate dominant pride. My father wept with joy, howling to the sky for his perfect lineage. Then, it was my turn. I stepped forward to the center of the grove, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I closed my eyes, tilting my face up to the silver light, waiting for the familiar pull in my chest. I waited for the roar in my soul, the fiery heat of the transformation, the awakening of the beast. None came. Seconds bled into agonizing minutes. The silver moonlight washed over my skin, but inside, there was nothing. No wolf. No shift. Just a vast, echoing, empty silence. When I opened my eyes, the celebratory howling of the pack had died. The silence that replaced it was colder than the northern wind. I looked at my father, and for the first time in my life, I saw his expression morph from eager anticipation into a mask of pure, unadulterated disgust. In a pack of apex predators, a wolfless daughter is worse than dead, she is an embarrassment. The backlash was instant and merciless. That very night, my father, Alpha Garrett, stripped me of my birthright and my surname. He looked at me not as his flesh and blood, but as a defect. A parasite. My mother stopped looking me in the eye entirely, turning her face away whenever I entered a room as if my presence alone were a contagious disease. I became the ghost of the Silver Ridge Pack house. My comfortable room on the upper floors was given away, and I was banished to a drafty, windowless room in the cellars. While my siblings were trained in combat, diplomacy, and leadership, my daily routine was reduced to the grueling manual labor of a shiftless servant. I wore tattered, oversized clothes cast off by the Omegas and ate whatever leftovers were left on the platters after the real wolves had finished their feasts. They thought the isolation would break me. They thought stripping me of my title and treating me like garbage would force me to whimper, to beg for their scraps, or to curl up and die in the dark. But as I lay on my thin cot in the freezing cellar, listening to the distant, arrogant howling of my family above, a strange, quiet steel began to harden in my chest. I didn't have a wolf to protect me, which meant I had to rely entirely on myself. They thought they were punishing me, but with every passing day, the cruelty of the Silver Ridge Pack was forging a hidden resilience inside of me. They didn't realize they were building a weapon. If you are ready to see how years of hardship can secretly turn a defective girl into a force to be reckoned with, smash that like button. They thought they were breaking her, they were actually sharpening her edge. Subscribe and hit the bell, the true test is about to arrive. Let's enter the full story. Chapter 1. 8 years passed. 8 years of being a ghost in my own home. While my golden wolf sister, Chloe, was celebrated as the pack's future jewel, dressed in fine silks and groomed to be the perfect high-ranking mate, my life was measured in metrics of sweat, dirt, and heavy iron. I spent my days scrubbing the dried blood from the warriors' training mats, washing the endless piles of dishes from feasts I wasn't allowed to attend, and carrying massive logs of ironwood through the waist-deep winter snow. The Silver Ridge Pack thought the brutal manual labor was breaking my spirit. They thought they were punishing me for the crime of being born without a beast. But they didn't understand the basic laws of survival. Without a wolf's supernatural strength or accelerated healing to rely on, my human body had to adapt the hard way. Every heavy log I hauled up the mountain slopes tore my muscles down, only for them to knit back together denser, leaner, and stronger. My skin grew calloused, my lungs grew accustomed to the biting frost, and my bones, forced to bear weight no ordinary human could manage, turned into something resembling forged northern iron. I could move through the snow without making a sound, and I could work for 12 hours straight without a single whimper. They had stripped away my name and my status, but in doing so, they had inadvertently stripped away my weakness. By the time I turned 18, I was no longer the fragile, weeping child from the sacred grove. I was a survivor, completely hidden in plain sight. I kept my head down, my tattered oversized clothes masking the lean, lethal musculature I had built, and my quiet eyes observing every flaw, every lazy habit of the wolves who deemed themselves superior to me. They thought I was serving them. I was simply biding my time. And then, on a random Tuesday in the dead of winter, the air in our territory completely changed. I was out by the woodpile, axe in hand, when a sudden, suffocating pressure rolled over the mountains. It didn't feel like the wind, it felt like a physical weight dropping from the sky, thick with the scent of ozone, burnt ash, and a raw, terrifyingly absolute dominance. The birds in the canopy went dead silent. The guard wolves at the perimeter walls dropped to their bellies, their tails tucked between their legs. A messenger burst through the courtyard gates, his face pale with a mixture of awe and sheer terror. The feared Alpha King, Torin of the Midnight-Eclipse pack, had just crossed our borders unannounced. And he was marching straight for our hall. The entire Silver Ridge pack house erupted into immediate, unadulterated panic. Alpha King Torin did not make casual social calls. He was the ruler of the Midnight-Eclipse pack, a brutal, unyielding territory of volcanic crags and fearsome warriors who answered to no one. He was known as the ruthless sovereign who executed rogue alphas without blinking, and whose pack laws were written in iron. For him to cross our borders without warning meant our pack was either under suspicion, or about to be crushed. "Move, you useless freak," my father, Alpha Garrett, roared, slamming his hand against the kitchen door frame as he barked orders to the servants. His face was entirely pale, sweat already beading at his hairline. "Maya! Get your tattered ass down into the scullery and stay there. If the king catches sight of a shiftless, deformed parasite wearing our pack's tattered rags, he will take it as an insult. Hide yourself until he leaves." "Yes, Alpha," I muttered, keeping my voice flat and my head low. I didn't care about their panic. I turned away, stepping down into the dark, damp scullery beneath the grand dining hall. Around me, the other servants were trembling, spilling wine and dropping platters as they rushed to prepare a hasty feast of apology and submission. My sister, Chloe, was practically being shoved into her finest gold-threaded silk gown by 3 panicked handmaidens, my mother frantically brushing her golden hair to ensure she looked like a prize worth sparing. I sat in the dim shadows of the lower kitchen, listening to the heavy, synchronized thud of massive boots entering the grand hall right above my head. The moment King Torin stepped across the threshold, the ceiling timbers seemed to groan under the sheer, localized weight of his presence. His dominant aura was so thick it filtered straight through the floorboards, making the air in the scullery taste like a thunderstorm about to break. It was suffocating. I could hear the muffled, pathetic sounds of our pack's high-ranking warriors dropping to their knees on the stone above, their inner wolves instantly whimpering in the presence of a true apex predator. My father's voice drifted down, sounding incredibly small, sycophantic, and desperate as he offered the king our finest meats, our finest wines, and the company of his beautiful, pure-blooded daughter, Chloe. I leaned against the stone wall, a cold smile touching my lips. They were up there begging for their lives, playing political games, completely terrified. I felt entirely safe in the dark, dirty scullery. I was just the shiftless servant, the invisible ghost. Nobody was looking for me. Nobody cared I was here. But as the heavy footsteps of the king moved directly over the center of the kitchen ceiling, a sudden, sharp, static-like prickle scratched at the back of my neck. The air inside my lungs grew intensely warm. For the first time in 18 years, a strange, unexplainable pull ignited right behind my ribs, tugging me toward the stairs. I frowned, rubbing my chest. It wasn't the pull of a wolf. It was something deeper, heavier, and completely undeniable. Fate was pulling on the thread, and the walls of the scullery were suddenly feeling far too small to hold me. Chapter 2. The heavy oak door to the kitchen was my only barrier between the dim, safe shadows of the scullery and the terrifying display of power unfolding in the grand hall. I was ordered to hide, but the strange, unexplainable pull I felt earlier, the one that warmed my chest, was too strong. I crept up the stairs, pressing my calloused ear against the rough wood, waiting. When the silence above became too suffocating, I gently pushed the door open just a fraction of an inch, peeking through the narrow crack. The grand hall, usually a place of drunken brawls and chaotic noise, was dead silent. From my hidden vantage point, I watched him. King Torin of the Midnight-Eclipse pack did not occupy the hall, he dominated it. He sat in my father's high chair, which suddenly looked like a toy beneath him. He was a mountain of rugged muscle, clad in dark, battle-scarred plate armor with intricate relief patterns, draped beneath a massive, obsidian fur cloak that absorbed the high-contrast light. His face was stern and intense, his long dark hair and beard framing expression that was chiseled from cold volcanic rock. He wore no gold, no jewels, only the scars of a ruler who fought his own battles. Opposite him, my family looked absolutely pathetic. My father, Alpha Garrett, was bowing so low his nose nearly brushed the stone floor, his face a pale mask of sycophantic terror. Beside him, my mother was pushing Chloe forward, a beautiful jewel in her gold-threaded white gown, her blonde hair braided perfectly. Chloe was noble, her natural resilience showing, but even she was trembling. They were parading her like a pure-blooded prize, desperate to sell her off to spare their own cowardly necks. Torin looked utterly bored. His piercing amber eyes, burning with a golden heat that made my skin prickle even through the door crack, scanned the room with predatory indifference. He wasn't looking at my father, he was looking through them. The high-ranking wolves of Silver Ridge were all kneeling, their eyes averted, their bodies pressing against the cold stone, their inner beasts utterly silenced by the dominant aura rolling off the king. It was a feast of fools, a display of spineless submission, and the terrifying king in the center of it all seemed to be searching for something he already knew wasn't there. The fragile peace of the grand hall shattered in an instant. Near the edge of the high table, a young, clumsy Omega servant boy, newly assigned to the feast and visibly trembling from King Torin's oppressive aura, lost his footing on the slick stone floor. With a loud, deafening clang, the heavy tray of silver chalices he was carrying slipped from his hands, scattering across the floor and splashing dark red wine directly onto the pristine, polished leather boots of my father's elite guard. The silence that followed was terrifying. "Incompetent little parasite," my father, Alpha Garrett, bellowed. His face twisted with rage, his alpha pride deeply insulted that such a mistake would happen in front of the king. He backhanded his chair away, stepping down from the dais with his fist clenched, his dominant aura flaring to strike the boy down. The young Omega curled into a ball on the floor, whimpering, entirely helpless. I didn't calculate the consequences. For 8 years, I had watched this pack break the weak, and for 8 years, I had held my tongue. But looking at that terrified boy, something inside my forged iron bones snapped. Before my father's fist could connect with the boy's face, I lunged from the crack of the kitchen door. My human movements were completely silent, blindingly fast from years of carrying weight in the snow. I dropped to the floor, my hands catching the falling silver tray midair to block the trajectory of the blow, shielding the young Omega completely with my own body. My father's heavy, armored fist slammed violently into the ironwood tray I held against my shoulder. The sheer force of his alpha strength sent a sharp, agonizing pain rippling through my chest, but my dense, hardened muscles absorbed the impact. I didn't break. I didn't even whimper. I stood up slowly, stepping directly between my furious father and the crying servant. I tossed the dented silver tray aside, tracking my father's shocked expression. I met his furious, bloodshot gaze with an absolute, icy coldness that no submissive Omega had ever dared to show him. "The mess is cleaned, Alpha," I said, my voice flat, steady, and entirely devoid of fear. My father gasped, his jaw tightening as he realized who had defied him in public. "Maya, you shiftless, insolent." He raised his hand to strike me again, but he froze. The entire room suddenly turned completely freezing. The low, rumbling growl that vibrated through the floorboards didn't come from my father, or from any guard in the hall. It came from the high chair. Alpha King Torin had completely stopped talking. He had stood up from the throne, his towering frame casting a massive, predatory shadow over the entire room. His amber eyes were no longer bored, they were glowing a molten, lethal gold, his nostrils flaring as he caught the air. He wasn't looking at my father. He wasn't looking at Chloe. His piercing, burning gaze was locked entirely onto me. Chapter 3. Bring her to me. The command didn't just vibrate through the room, it felt like a heavy iron weight dropping onto the chests of every wolf present. King Torin's voice was a rich, gravelly baritone that made the floorboards tremble and the crystal chandeliers above hum with static. It was a true Alpha's command, absolute and unyielding. My father, Alpha Garrett, froze, his raised hand hovering in the air. He blinked, a nervous, sweating smile plastered onto his face as he turned back toward the dais. "Your Majesty," my father stammered, his voice losing all its booming authority, reducing him to a groveling subordinate. "Please, accept my deepest apologies for this eyesore. This is Maya. She is just a shiftless servant. Defective. A wolf-less mistake born to my house. I will have the guards throw her back into the cellar immediately so she doesn't offend your presence." "I did not ask for her pedigree, Garrett," Torin cut him off, his voice dangerously smooth, yet carrying a lethal edge that made my father instantly choke on his words. Torin stepped down from the dais, his massive obsidian fur cloak sweeping behind him like the wings of a predatory bird. I said, "Bring her to me." My mother clutched her gold-threaded gown, her face turning pale as snow. Beside her, Chloe's jaw dropped, her perfect, braided golden hair shifting as she stared at me with a mixture of confusion and boiling jealousy. The golden princess of the pack was standing right there, practically offering herself on a silver platter, but the king hadn't looked at her once. "Move," my father hissed under his breath, glaring at me with eyes full of venomous rage as he stepped back. I didn't look at him. I kept my chin high, my shoulders squared beneath my tattered, oversized tunic. Every eye in the grand hall was drilled into my back, hot, judgmental, and completely stunned, as I walked toward the high table. With every step I took across the cracked stone floor, the strange, intense heat in my chest grew stronger, fighting the natural coldness of my winter-hardened skin. I wasn't walking like a servant going to her execution. I was walking like a survivor. And as I stopped exactly at the base of the dais, looking up into the molten amber eyes of the Alpha King, the heavy, suffocating pressure of his dominance didn't crush me. It felt like an invitation. King Torin closed the distance between us, his massive, towering frame eclipsing the harsh light of the chandeliers. Up close, he smelled of cold midnight air, ancient pine forests, and a raw, metallic heat that seemed to call directly to the iron in my bones. He didn't hesitate. He reached out with his massive, calloused hand and gripped my wrist. Behind me, I could hear my father chuckle under his breath, while Chloe smirked, adjusting her gold-threaded gown. My family was waiting for the show. They were waiting for Torin's legendary, crushing alpha aura to filter through his touch, breaking my fragile, human frame and forcing me to drop to my knees in whimpering agony. They wanted me to be humiliated. Instead, the world exploded. The exact millisecond his bare skin met mine, a violent, blinding jolt of pure energy shot up my arm. It wasn't the traditional, suffocating pack magic I had felt from my father. This was something primal, cosmic, and fiercely electric. The temperature in the hall skyrocketed in a single breath. The air snapped and cracked with visible arcs of blue static electricity, blowing my tattered sleeves backward and rattling the silver chalices on the tables. My heart didn't stutter, it roared. The strange, sleeping warmth behind my ribs tore open like a dying star, flooding my veins with an ancient, unfiltered power. Torin gasped, his massive chest heaving as his iron grip tightened, not out of malice, but out of sheer, unadulterated shock. The molten amber in his eyes bled into a brilliant, luminescent gold. His inner wolf didn't just break to the surface, it threw back its head and unleashed a deafening, seismic roar that shattered every glass window along the eastern wall of the grand hall. The sound vibrated through the marrow of every wolf present, forcing the elite guards to clamp their hands over their ears. Torin leaned down, his face inches from mine, his breathing ragged as his nostrils flared, inhaling my scent as if he were a drowning man finally finding air. Fated, he whispered, his deep voice carrying a layered, dual resonance that echoed through the soul of every living creature in the room. He looked at me with a reverence that borders on worship. I have found my Luna. A heavy, breathless silence crashed over the hall, broken only by the sound of glass tinkling onto the stone floor. My father's smirk froze, his face draining of all color, while Chloe stepped back, her hands flying to her mouth in absolute horror. The wolfless freak, the cellar-dwelling ghost, had just been claimed by the King of Kings. Chapter 4. This is a mistake. My father's voice bellowed through the shattered hall, a desperate, screeching roar that completely stripped him of his remaining alpha dignity. He staggered forward, his hands shaking, his chest heaving as his alpha pride cracked into 1,000 pieces right in front of his elite warriors. Your Majesty, I beg you to look closer. Alpha Garrett pleaded, his bloodshot eyes darting between Torin's hand and my scarred wrist. She is defective. She was rejected by the moon goddess herself on her 10th awakening. She has no beast, no scent, no alpha bloodline to pass on. She cannot bear heirs for the throne of the Midnight-Eclipse. She is useless. Behind him, Chloe was weeping openly, her tears of pristine jealousy turning into raw, venomous rage. Her inner golden wolf broke through her gaze, her eyes flashing in angry amber as she snarled directly at me. She's a thief. She used human witchcraft to trick you. I am the pure-blooded daughter of this house. I am the one who belongs on that throne, not a cellar-dwelling freak. The venom in the room was thick enough to choke on. The high-ranking warriors were murmuring, their lips curling into sneers as their pack brain washed over them, demanding that the status quo be maintained. They couldn't handle the reality that the girl they had starved and beaten for 8 years was suddenly holding the keys to the empire. But King Torin didn't even look at them. His gaze never left my face. With a smooth, fiercely possessive movement, he yanked my arm forward, pulling me completely flush against his heavy dark plate armor. The cold iron of his chest piece pressed against my cheek, but the heat radiating from his body wrapped around me like a volcanic shield. Before the court could take another step, Torin unclasped his massive, obsidian fur cloak and threw it over my shoulders. The heavy, dark fur instantly engulfed my tattered tunic, completely masking my small frame beneath his royal weight. The rich, suffocating scent of midnight air, ozone, and pine flooded my senses, entirely erasing the smell of my abusive home and silencing the venomous screams of my family. Torin turned his head toward my father, his face dropping into a mask of pure, unadulterated executioner's ice. Speak another word against my Luna, Garrett, Torin's baritone rumbled, his voice dropping into a register so dangerously low it made the stones beneath our feet visibly vibrate, and I will tear your tongue from your throat before the sun sets. My father, Alpha Garrett, went completely rigid. His face twisted from pale terror into a reckless, desperate fury. To be threatened in his own hall, in front of his own warriors, by a king who was choosing a defect over his prized daughter, was too much for his alpha pride to bear. If he couldn't convince the king, he would prove his point by breaking me. She is a fragile, broken parasite, Your Majesty. Garrett roared. With a vicious snarl, he threw his shoulders back and unleashed the full, suffocating weight of his alpha dominance. A visible ripple of kinetic distortion blasted outward from his chest, slamming through the hall. It was a psychic, spiritual pressure designed to crush the will of any lower-ranking wolf. Instantly, the elite guards at the doors groaned and dropped to one knee, their heads forced down by the invisible weight of their alpha's command. The pressure hit me like a runaway freight train. The air was sucked from my lungs, and a massive, crushing weight slammed down onto my shoulders, demanding that I bow, demanding that I crawl, demanding that I submit to the master of the house. Beside me, King Torin's muscles tensed, his hands shifting to draw his weapon to defend me, but I held up a single calloused hand, stopping him. I didn't need a king to fight this battle. Garrett smirked, his eyes flashing a dominant red, waiting for my knees to buckle and smash into the stone floor. He waited for me to weep. But he had forgotten one crucial detail. He had spent 8 years forcing me to carry hundreds of pounds of ironwood through the freezing snow without a wolf to support me. My human muscles didn't have a wolf spirit to be intimidated. My bones, forged in the fires of their relentless cruelty, were made of absolute iron. I grounded my heels into the cracked stone floor. I threw my shoulders back beneath Torin's massive obsidian cloak, absorbing the entire shockwave of my father's aura without moving a single inch. My knees didn't bend. My back didn't bow. Instead, I raised my chin, my quiet, unyielding eyes locking directly onto my father's panicked face. A strange, ancient warmth flared behind my ribs, a pure, unfiltered spiritual energy that completely bypassed the wolf spirit entirely, radiating a pressure so intense it actually pushed back against his aura. My father's red eyes dilated in sudden, sheer horror. He staggered backward a step, his breath catching in his throat as his dominance shattered against me like glass against stone. Beside me, King Torin let out a dark, booming laugh, a sound full of fierce pride and savage amusement. She doesn't need a beast to rule you, Garrett, Torin murmured, his golden eyes glowing with absolute triumph as he looked down at me. She has spent 8 years carrying the weight of your hatred, and it only made her unbreakable. She is already stronger than your entire bloodline. Torin tightened his iron grip around my waist, lifting me effortlessly into his arms. He didn't look back at the shivering, broken wolves of the Silver Ridge pack as he turned toward the exit. We are leaving, Torin decreed to the silent hall. And God help anyone who tries to stand in her way. Chapter 5. Torin carried me away that very night, leaving my family paralyzed in the snow and glass of their own ruined hall. Wrapped in the heavy, protective weight of the king's obsidian cloak, I watched the jagged, snow-capped peaks of my abusive childhood fade into the distance. We rode for hours on a massive, shadow-furred stallion, climbing higher and higher into the black volcanic crags that marked the border of the Midnight-Eclipse territory. The air here didn't bite with the stagnant frost of the Silver Ridge, it felt alive, thick with the scent of sulfur, ash, and an untamed, ancient magic. As the first light of dawn began to crack over the horizon, bleeding deep crimson and violet hues across the sky, the imposing silhouette of the citadel appeared. It was a terrifying masterpiece of military architecture, a sprawling fortress carved directly into the side of a volcanic mountain, its towering walls built from solid, glistening obsidian that reflected the dark morning light. Jagged spikes lined the ramparts, and rivers of glowing magma flowed through deep trenches around the perimeter, acting as a fiery, unbreachable moat. Looking up at the monolithic iron gates, my chest tightened. I braced myself. For 8 years, I had been a prisoner, a servant, an outcast. As the heavy iron gates groaned open, echoing like thunder through the canyon, I expected another cage. I expected to be hidden away in a darker cellar, treated as a political anomaly or a fragile human pet that the king had taken on a whim. I clutched the edges of Torin's cloak closer to my chest, my iron-forged bones tensing for a fight. But as the horse trotted across the drawbridge and into the colossal central courtyard, my breath caught in my throat. The courtyard wasn't empty. Filled to the brim were thousands of the most fearsome, battle-hardened warriors on the continent. Men and women scarred by 100 wars, dressed in heavy dark iron plate armor, stood in perfect, silent formation. Elite vanguard soldiers, executioners, and apex predators lined the balconies and the stone steps leading up to the grand keep. The moment Torin pulled the stallion to a halt, a sharp, synchronized clatter resonated through the air. I flinched, expecting them to draw their weapons against the wolf-less intruder. Instead, every single one of those thousands of hardened warriors dropped to one knee in unison, their heavy iron boots cracking against the stone. They lowered their heads, their fists driven into their chests in the highest salute of the realm. They weren't bowing to a victim. They weren't looking at a defect. I looked down at my hand resting on the saddle pommel, and my eyes widened. Sometime during the ride, while I was half asleep against his chest, Torin had slipped his own heavy, onyx-angled royal signet ring onto my finger. It swallowed my hand, but its magical weight hummed in perfect harmony with the spark behind my ribs. I wasn't entering the Midnight-Eclipse territory as a tattered, hidden secret. I was entering as their supreme queen. The heavy obsidian doors of the royal chambers clicked shut, sealing out the grand, echoing courtyard and the kneeling vanguard. The room was vast, illuminated by high-contrast firelight from a massive stone hearth and the silver glow of the moon bleeding through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Torin walked over to me, his heavy armor clanking softly in the quiet room. With surprising gentleness for a man of his size, he reached out and slid his rough, callous thumbs beneath the collar of my tattered tunic, tilting his head as his amber eyes softened. He traced the faint, pale scars on my shoulders, remnants of the heavy ironwood logs and the lashes my family had given me when I didn't work fast enough. A low, sorrowful rumble vibrated in his chest, but it wasn't a growl of anger directed at me. It was pure, unadulterated protective fury for what I had endured. They thought they were punishing a dud, Torin murmured, his deep voice carrying a heavy warmth as he looked into my eyes. He took my shaking hands into his massive palms. They starved you, isolated you, and called you useless because they are blind, Maya. Your father's pack only understands power if it has a jaw and 4 legs. They are simple creatures. Torin, I don't understand, I whispered, my voice sounding small in the massive chamber. I don't have a wolf. You felt it. There is no beast inside of me. Because a beast is too small to contain what you actually are, Torin replied, a fierce, reverent smile touching his chiseled face. He walked over to a heavy iron-bound chest, pulling out an ancient, weathered scroll made of dark leather. He unrolled it on the stone table, pointing a scarred finger at an ancient prophecy written in glowing, liquid silver ink. The oldest legends of the Midnight-Eclipse speak of a rare phenomenon, the wolf-less luna, Torin explained, his golden eyes flashing with intensity. Once every 1,000 years, a child is born whose soul is so vast, so incredibly dense with spiritual energy, that it completely rejects the animal form. If a wolf spirit tried to manifest inside of you, the sheer volume of your power would have shattered it. My breath hitched in my throat as I looked at the scroll. The drawing depicted a woman standing under a split moon, her hands radiating waves of pure, kinetic starlight, dropping armies of wolves to their knees without ever shifting. You aren't defective, Maya, Torin said, stepping closer until his chest armor pressed against me once more, his lips brushing my brow. You are a catalyst. A living conduit of pure spiritual energy. Your family tried to treat you like garbage because they couldn't control your volume. They sensed your power subconsciously, and it terrified them, so they tried to break you before you could realize what you are. He took my hand, placing it directly over his racing heart. My inner wolf didn't roar because you are a match for his strength, Torin whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He roared because he finally found his anchor. Together, we don't just rule a pack, Maya. We change the laws of the entire continent. Tomorrow, your training begins. It's time to learn how to weaponize the star inside your chest. Chapter 6. 1 month passed. One single, grueling month that completely erased the remaining shadows of the frightened girl who used to scrub the kitchen floors. Under Torin's fierce and watchful guidance, I didn't learn how to summon a beast. I learned how to unleash the star burning inside my chest. I spent hours on the volcanic plains of the Midnight-Eclipse, channeling the raw, kinetic starlight in my veins until I could shatter boulders with a flick of my wrist and move with the terrifying speed of a striking viper. My iron-forged bones were no longer just a shield, they were a lethal weapon. And then, the call came. A ragged, desperate messenger from the Silver Ridge pack arrived at our gates, bleeding and hyperventilating. A massive, bloodthirsty horde of rogue alphas had descended from the northern wastes, swarming my old home. The Silver Ridge pack was completely overwhelmed, their perimeter walls shattered, their warriors slaughtered. My father, Alpha Garrett, was begging the king for salvation. He was begging for survival. Torin agreed to help, but only under one absolute, non-negotiable condition. I would lead the vanguard. When we reached the borders of the Silver Ridge territory, the air smelled of thick smoke, copper blood, and burning pine. But I wasn't shivering in a tattered tunic this time. I stood at the crest of the mountain peak, dressed in custom-forged, sleek obsidian plate armor that hugged my lean, muscular frame. A massive midnight blue cloak billowed wildly behind me in the freezing winter wind, and Torin's golden onyx signet ring gleamed on my steel-braced finger. Behind me stood thousands of the most brutal, bloodthirsty elite warriors of the Midnight-Eclipse pack, their weapons drawn, their eyes glowing, waiting entirely for my command. Down in the valley, huddled in the ruined, burning courtyard of the pack house, were the survivors of the Silver Ridge. My father was on his knees, his armor cracked and stained with soot. My mother was weeping, clutching a battered, bleeding Chloe whose golden silk gown was torn to shreds. They looked up toward the mountain slope, desperately searching for the fearsome Alpha King to save them. Instead, their eyes landed on me. Through the thick smoke, my father recognized my face. I watched the exact second his jaw dropped, his bloodshot eyes widening in absolute, paralyzing shock as he realized that the terrifying commander leading the Empire's deadliest army was the useless, wolfless daughter he had thrown into the dirt. They were trembling, and for the first time in my life, it wasn't from the cold. The fragile silence of the valley was violently shattered as a dozen massive, blood-maddened rogue alphas burst from the tree line. Their fur was matted with filth, their eyes glowing a chaotic, feral red as they lunged straight toward my huddled, defenseless family. My father, Alpha Garrett, tried to raise his broken sword, but he was too weak. Chloe shrieked, covering her face, waiting for the fatal blow. "Vanguard," I said, my voice cutting through the wind like a razor blade. "Hold." Behind me, the thousands of Midnight-Eclipse warriors froze in perfect formation. They didn't draw their blades. They didn't move a muscle. They trusted their queen completely. I stepped forward alone, the edge of my obsidian armor catching the harsh morning light. I walked down the slope toward the charging beasts, my boots crunching rhythmically in the snow. The rogue alphas saw me, a seemingly fragile human girl standing in their path, and let out a chorus of mocking, guttural snarls, accelerating their pace. I didn't shift. I didn't sprout fur, and I didn't grow claws. Instead, I stopped 10 paces from the front line, took a deep breath, and slammed my heel into the frozen earth. The sleeping star behind my ribs exploded into a blazing supernova. Every ounce of the raw, kinetic starlight I had spent the last month weaponizing flooded out of my veins. A blinding, luminescent wave of pure, silver-blue cosmic energy erupted from my chest, expanding outward like a seismic shockwave. The force of the blast tore the topsoil from the earth, vaporizing the snow and shattering the ancient stone boulders in the courtyard. The rogue alphas didn't even have time to scream. The kinetic waves slammed into their massive frames, instantly neutralizing their alpha power and throwing them backward through the air, sending them crashing into the forest walls, unconscious and broken. The sheer, unfiltered spiritual pressure of my soul radiated across the entire valley. It was a pressure so immense, so utterly divine, that it bypassed the physical form entirely. My father, Alpha Garrett, clutched his chest as his inner wolf whimpered in absolute terror, buckling under a weight he couldn't comprehend. With a heavy thud, his knees slammed into the dirt. Beside him, Chloe collapsed to her knees, her eyes wide, staring up at me with a terrifying, breathless realization. The entire remaining council of the Silver Ridge Pack dropped to their bellies, their bodies shaking, completely paralyzed by the power of the girl they had treated as garbage. I walked through the smoking crater I had just created, my midnight cloak sweeping over the scorched grass. I stopped right in front of my father, looking down at him. He didn't look like a proud alpha anymore, he looked small, fragile, and utterly defeated. Maya, he whispered, his voice trembling as he looked at the royal signet ring on my finger. Please. I didn't execute them. Death would have been too easy an escape for the years of torment they inflicted. I am not your daughter, Garrett, I said, my voice echoing with a layered, cosmic resonance that made the earth hum. And you are no longer the alpha of this territory. By the law of the Midnight-Eclipse, your land, your resources, and your people now belong to my crown. With a flick of my wrist, a thread of silver energy wrapped around his chest, smoothly stripping him of his dominant pack aura and reducing him to a common pack member. I turned my back on them, looking up at the vanguard who threw their weapons into the air, cheering my name. The girl-born Wolfless had just rewritten the laws of the continent. The Epilogue. A year has passed since the silver starlight burned away the old, cruel hierarchy of the Silver Ridge. Today, the cold, oppressive pack house where I spent 8 years scrubbing floors in tattered rags is entirely unrecognizable. The grand ironwood gates are no longer designed to keep outcasts in the dark. Instead, the territory has been completely transformed into a flourishing sanctuary, a safe haven for the wolfless, the broken, the omegas, and the rejected shifters from every corner of the continent. Where my father once used physical violence to demand submission, there are now laughter, training grounds, and schools. We built a world where a person's worth is no longer determined by the size of their jaw or the ferocity of their beast, but by the resilience of their spirit. I stood out on the high obsidian balcony of the Midnight-Eclipse citadel, looking out over the sprawling, peaceful valleys below. The early evening sky was a deep, velvet indigo, and a massive, brilliant full moon was rising over the volcanic peaks, casting a warm, silver glow across my face. I looked down at my hands, no longer stained with kitchen grease, but adorned with the heavy royal signet ring that perfectly balanced the steady, thrumming supernova of spiritual energy in my chest. A pair of massive, warm arms wrapped possessively around my waist from behind, a heavy obsidian fur cloak draping over both of our shoulders. Torin rested his chin gently against the crook of my neck, his deep, gravelly baritone vibrating directly against my spine. His inner wolf let out a soft, completely content purr that vibrated through my bones. You're thinking about the past again, my Luna, Torin murmured, his lips brushing against my temple as he inhaled the scent of midnight and pine that we now shared. Not the past, I said softly, leaning back into his solid, unyielding chest armor, a serene smile playing on my lips. I'm looking at the future we built. The future you built, Torin corrected gently, his iron grip tightening around me with fierce, unwavering pride. You broke their old world with bare hands and a human heart, Maya. There isn't a wolf alive who doesn't know your name. I tilted my head up to meet his molten gold eyes, the ultimate apex predator who had looked into the dark cellar of my life and seen a queen. I looked back out at the glowing lights of the sanctuary below, then up at the silver moon. I was no longer the fragile, weeping 10-year-old child left abandoned in the sacred grove. I was no longer the invisible ghost of the Silver Ridge. I am Maya, the wolfless Luna of the Midnight-Eclipse, and our reign has only just begun. And that concludes our incredible journey of the wolfless girl who broke the old world to build a better one. If your heart is full after that ending, make sure to smash that like button, leave a comment telling me your favorite part, and subscribe to Lily's Heart Tales so you never miss our next serialized romance adventure. Keep your chin high, my pack, until next time.